Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Workflows and Espressos. I am Megan Myers. I am still getting used to that, but excited to be back. Second episode post wedding honeymoon, and now post DARM, which I am so excited to talk about. And in even more exciting news, I also realized that I say exciting, I think, more than any human on this entire planet. My best friend slash teammate, colleague, sister, all the things is here. Lauren, Gertie, welcome to the show.
Gertie, thanks for having me back.
I'm so excited that you're here.
Excited to be here.
Incredible. Um, we had a lovely week in Florida last week. It was honestly much needed since our vacation in Puerto Rico. We needed another trip to Florida to really just
2 weeks after.
round out. 2 weeks after to really round out before we came back to Jackson because it is in fact a blizzard right now.
I don't like it. But it was a nice hometown date, hanging out with the family, and by family, I mean your family.
Yes. Yeah, so Lauren and I because we obviously met in Jackson and became friends here. We always talk. Lauren's from Southern California and I'm from the Florida Panhandle. So we always talk about how we want to do hometown dates and introduce each other to like where we grew up. And DARM just so happened to be in my hometown. So it was so fun.
It was so fun. I can't wait to go back.
It was, like, freezing, which kind of sucked because we were expecting to leave and enter in the warm, and we didn't. It was so cold, but Lauren's favorite thing to do is walk on the beach, so you got some good beach time in, and you got to see the white sand and the clear water, which was amazing, and we got to see Will Guidara again.
Yes. He's so good.
He's so good. So last year at DARM, I remember there was a lot of hype about him being a speaker, and I embarrassingly enough didn't know who he was. And so I told Clark, like, Lauren and I are going to the keynote. It's Will Guidara. And he was like, what do you mean you don't know who Will Guidara is? Like, he is one of the most famous restaurateurs in the world. He's so incredible. I'm so jealous. And Lauren and I ended up sitting like front row. And then Will had a flight to catch at the end of his keynote. And we like chased him backstage and got a photo with him that I sent to Clark. And I was like, look. So then we came home. We read Unreasonable Hospitality. Clark read Unreasonable Hospitality. It's this thing that we've been talking about. I've done like multiple episodes on it. And we got to see him again last week, which was so cool. And his keynote this time was different, which we felt so excited about. I mean, we were like, I think you described it to Melanie when we were talking to her from Key Data as life changing last year, which it so was. It was
Yeah.
so good. And this year he talked about, I don't know, we're trying to figure out what to call them, like his 4 tips for like
Like a
improving.
leader. Yeah.
Yeah, like leadership, hospitality, and in just like improvement overall. And they're so good. So Lauren was taking like rigorous notes while he was talking, and I was just hoping that I would retain it all. And then we got on this recording and I was like, you're gonna have to remind me, which is really good because then we debriefed and we're really excited to talk through each one and how we plan on applying it to everyday life and just kind of our thoughts behind each of his tips. So let's get into it without further ado.
So the first point that he mentioned was willing to be vulnerable, which I thought was so cool because that's something that you and I actually talk about all the time. Like we talk about practicing vulnerability. It's definitely something that I talk about in therapy all the time. But when applying it to the workplace, like I always felt, and this could be due to my background. So before being in hospitality, I worked in healthcare, which is like very much obviously a corporate setting and like, you
Buttoned
know,
up.
buttoned up, exactly, and I'll actually never forget when I started at Outpost on my first day, I wore a blazer and everyone else was, like, in jeans, and it's like, what was I thinking? It's much more of a casual environment, and I remember you once told me, like, "Hey, you can take off the three-piece suit, like, this is more casual," and you even went as far to tell me that sometimes I sounded like I'm wearing, like, a headset, which is funny now.
It's funny now, certainly not then. Where
But
he's like, my new boss is mean.
yeah, she told me to take off my suit is what she told me. Mm. But no, I think it's great, and, like, it just leads to, like, being more genuine, and I think something that he touched on was, like, people want to connect with other people, and we do that by, like, letting our guards down. So I thought that was really good, and I think being in a role now that's, like, more laid back,
Mhm.
I've had the opportunity to do that more often.
Yeah, it's interesting, like, when I first started at 360 Blue, I showed up to my interview, and I was in a dress, and everyone else like, some people were literally wearing, like, leggings, and I was actually applying for a job where I did wear a literal headset and reservations, and like, people it was so, so casual, and I remember, like, my first boss kind of talking to me about the work environment and said, like, "Hey, we work really, really hard, but we're super laid back in the office and kind of have this, like, chill environment." And when I got the job at Outpost and initially, like, came up to Jackson and was going through the interview process, I was really drawn to that environment. But I've told you before, like, sometimes it worries me because I've never had any experience in, like, a very corporate setting, and there have definitely been times, like, especially now when I'm in board meetings and I'm just so used to being super casual, and what I love about our industry is that it's, like, pretty casual in general,
Yeah.
and it's funny because, like, whenever we've gone to IMN, which is definitely the most, like, buttoned up of the conferences, you see a lot of, like, literal suits, and
Mhm.
it's funny because you talk about, like, what you're wearing and how it relates to vulnerability, but I do think that there is strong correlation between the 2 things, right? Like, vulnerability is showing up exactly who you are and letting people see more than just, like, the surface of you,
Mhm.
and I think, like, Rachel Alday has been talking about how connection is her word of the year, which
Yes.
is Brené Brown did a talk, like, many years ago on how you can't have any type of authentic connection without vulnerability, and I think that that is like, it couldn't be more true, and the leaders that I have always wanted to follow are the leaders that are vulnerability and show more than just, like, what meets the eye, and I don't know, it, like, very much spoke to, I think, both of us when he talked about, like, the willingness to be vulnerable and how that impacts, like, the hospitality that you provide to guests, and also, like, how you show up as a leader to your team, because I think showing your team that you are a human that, like, makes mistakes and a lot of things you're doing for the first time too, that a lot like, people want to follow someone that they can relate to, and nobody can relate to a robot.
Yeah, no one relates to perfection, and I think, like, as a leader, I always thought, like, "Well, you're the one that has to have everything, like, together," and I think you've showed me that, like, both can be true at once, or, like, 2 weeks ago, I had an employee that, like, made a really big mistake on payroll, but, like, "Hey, I've made that mistake too," and, like, just being
Mhm,
able to, like, connect with them and just, like, relate to, like, we've all been there.
mhm. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I've ever talked about this on the show, but, like, when I went through my divorce, it was like my 2nd week at Outpost. It was horrible, and I
I
remember being like, "I just got this new job, and now I'm getting divorced, and my life is absolutely not together." Like, I was going through, like, moving out of my old house and moving to a different city and facing a lot of, like, anxiety and shame around the fact that I was getting divorced, and, I was so young, and I remember, like, finally opening up to people at the office and saying, like, "Hey, this I'm going through this, like, really shitty time in life right now because I'm moving." It was budgeting season.
Mhm.
And it was the first budget that we had ever created, and I remember, like, really wanting to make this huge impression on the team, and literally, like, our holding company had just been created, and we were starting, like, 3 businesses all at one time and acquiring another, and it was so busy, and the second that I told people, like, "Hey, I'm doing the best that I can, like, I'm really trying to dive into work, but also my personal life is certainly falling apart," it allowed for so much more, like, connection and empathy and understanding in the workplace, and
And creating room for yourself.
yeah, totally,
Mhm.
and that is, like, honestly the most vulnerable I think I've ever had to be at work as someone who tries to, like, "Everything's great, I'm super optimistic," and,
Yeah.
I don't know, after that, I remember thinking, like, "Okay, there are perks to just speaking the truth of, like, hey, I might not be showing up the best that I ever have, but, like, I'm gonna try, and I still wanna come into work and, there are some sensitivities around this, and this, and I don't know, like, now looking back, I'm so glad that I did that at a time where for the first, like, while, I was like, "Oh god, I hope no one finds this out."
Yeah, it's hard, but we did get through budgeting season. We did do it. The 3 other businesses are still standing.
Amen, and I certainly got through my divorce as well,
You got
so
through your divorce.
everything's great. Okay, so willingness to be vulnerable obviously spoke to us. Let's talk about his second tip.
Willing to be wrong. And I think this one, like, we talk about all the time and it's harder to practice, right? But, like, you even mentioned in one of your sessions, like, everything's written in the sand and nothing is ever set in stone. And I think when you're trying all new things, right? Like, whether it's like a new software or a new process, you want it to work. And sometimes it doesn't. And you just
Yeah.
have to be willing to, like, admit that to yourself and your team. And I think that also requires, like, vulnerability, but willing to be wrong is good, and I think it applies to a guest as well. Like, I've definitely, or an owner, like, underestimated how long something's gonna take or how much something is going to cost, and so, like, going back and saying you were wrong, is difficult to do, but necessary.
Yeah, I think a flaw, but also something that I'm proud of my personality is that I move at like 5,000 miles per hour.
Yeah.
And with that, I make mistakes and sometimes like overlook details that I should have really like gone through with a fine tooth comb. And I don't know, there are so many things that I really like about moving fast, and I think that it keeps people interested and engaged, and I also think that the world moves really fast, and, like, if you're not innovating, then you're dying, and that is, like, so much of the age of technology that we're in and hospitality in general in this industry that's, like, new compared to so many other industries, but so, like, quickly growing.
Mhm.
That part of that means there are decisions that I've made that I wouldn't say regret, but, like, that were not right, and times when I've had to be like, "Oh, never mind, like, we were gonna do this, but now we're gonna do this," and I always talk about, like, pivoting, like you said, or how nothing is set in stone, and I don't know, I really liked that he said this willingness to be wrong, because I think that that's part of moving quickly, is understanding that, like, when you are changing and evolving and growing and moving at a rapid pace, you're gonna screw things up. And when you're leading a team, it can be really hard to go back to the team and say like, "Hey, I know that I said that this was gonna be our new process, but now it's gonna be this." That just has to be something that's ingrained in you, right? And when you do it and say like, "Hey, I screwed this up, like, I was wrong," the team feels comfortable apologizing and also being wrong, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know, I don't think it's necessarily like, "Hey, all mistakes are okay, and it's okay to screw up payroll 8 times." I think it's
No.
just it's gonna happen. Like, not everything is gonna be perfect, and there are gonna be decisions that we make that we go back on and change, and also, like you said, with guests and with homeowners, like, there are times that I've said to an owner, "You're gonna make $80,000 this year," and then things, like, drastically changed, and there are times when I've accidentally set a rate at $500 a night instead of $5,000 a night, and certainly had to go back on that and make a bit of an adjustment and write a very large check. Like, there are mistakes no matter what in the workplace and in life that are made, and owning up to those mistakes and being honest and providing context for what happened and then making it right, I think that's all you can do, right? Because you're never gonna stop making mistakes. That's just a part of growing.
Yeah. Revenue conversations are always fun.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll never forget the first, like, revenue mistake that I made and, like, having to call the owner and saying, "Hey, we booked this for X a night, and it was supposed to be Y," and then having like, the company had to write a check, and I literally was like, "I should pack up my desk because this is
I
definitely
should
my
just
last day here." And, my boss coming to me and saying like, "Look, revenue is unfortunately one of those departments where, like, you don't get a whole lot of mistakes. So, this is your first one, and I guarantee, like, it's not gonna happen again." And I think I made one other, like, over the course of 6 years that resulted in having to have a conversation and pay the owner out, and this is when everything was so manual, like, back before we
Price
had
lines,
pricing tools
wheelhouse.
that we right, and, so it was a lot more manual, and you were able to make mistakes a lot more easily than you are now, but I don't know, then anybody that came to work in revenue that reported to me, I would always sit down with them and say, like, "Welcome to the revenue department. We're gonna have a lot of fun. Unfortunately, this isn't really a spot where we can make a whole lot of mistakes when it comes to numbers." Um but yeah, I mean, it happens, right? And it links into vulnerability because the next time that somebody made a mistake and they forgot a zero, which everybody does at once and then they don't
Yeah.
do it again, I sat down with the person and I said, like, "Hey, I did the same thing." And it was horrible and I'll never forget the feeling. And I cried about it and like thought about it for weeks and weeks and weeks. And then I didn't do it again. And I don't know, that like vulnerability and willingness to be wrong, I think ultimately helped me and the team moving forward.
Yeah, I remember there was one time early in, like, our time at Outpost, and I made a revenue mistake,
Yes.
and I
Yep.
was so scared to tell you. And I remember you said, like, "On a scale of 1 to 10, I'm a 6 on how mad I am, but just make sure it never happens again." And it
Hey,
hasn't. I was so scared. It has never happened again.
hey. Wow, you're remembering some quotes that I've certainly said over the last couple of years that
You've
I
said
don't
a couple
remember,
things.
and they're really
There's something.
now I'm gonna remember them. Um, okay, number 3, willing to be disheartened. So good.
This one is
So
so
good.
good. Yeah, he said leader doesn't mean cheerleader, and I think that's so good because you and I both are someone that, like, when something goes wrong, I typically lean in, like, being optimistic or like, "Oh, everything's gonna be okay," or like, "Here's what we can do," and I immediately want to fix it, and I think especially when it's an employee that's upset, whether it's, like, at another teammate or at an owner or a guest, like, you just want to fix it instead of just sitting in it for a second and, like, actually listening. That one is something that, like, I am trying to practice, but is definitely hard.
Yeah. I so we both took the Enneagram with Lenny Jones from Tandemly a couple months ago, and we had the same tri-type, which are were 7s, which,
Mhm.
is the enthusiast, right? Is that right?
Yes, and then action type is an 8. What's 8 again?
The challenger,
Mhm, and then our thinking type, is that right? Is a
3,
3.
which is the achiever,
Mhm.
and but our 7s, like, we're naturally enthusiastic and optimistic. I really, like when he said this, I remember sitting there and like, it was funny. The first 2, I was like, "Okay, I consider myself, like, pretty vulnerable, and I think I can, like,
I can
you
admit
know,
I'm wrong.
I can admit when I'm wrong and be okay when other people are wrong." Huh. I'm not very good with the willingness to be disheartened. I definitely find myself being the cheerleader and not really sitting in the discomfort of, like,
Mhm.
when a goal isn't met or when we don't get that deal that we were working toward or I don't know, anything team related. I think I really struggle with being the leader and feeling like it's my job to make sure that everybody knows, like, it's all right and everything's fine, and I don't know, I related to so much of what he said, which is just like, "Hey, it's okay to strive for something as a team, not get it, and then sit in it for a second and say, like, 'Damn, this, like, sucks.'"
Or to, like, show your team that you're also disheartened, feels
Yes.
like you, because I never wanna show that. I just wanna tell everyone that it's okay and we're gonna get it next time.
Yeah, completely. And it's funny because Clark, my husband, is this same way. Like, we're both very, very, very optimistic and like our house in general is pretty like smiley and happy go lucky. And whenever anything gets like remotely somber, or if we like wanted to do something and it didn't work out or whatever, like we're working towards something and it didn't work out, we're like, it's fine, it's fine, it's fine, it's fine. Like, let's move on. And so I don't know. That was the lesson that really stuck out to me when he was talking is this understanding that it's okay to like be sad or mad for a second and for your team to see that, like you said. So good.
That was a good one.
Yeah, I don't know. I wonder, like, how much of it is personality type versus, like, how you were raised. Because now looking up, like, I don't really consider either of my parents to be, like, as optimistic as I was. So I don't know, maybe it is just, like, strictly personality type.
We're gonna have to ask someone with a different personality.
Yeah, true. Yeah, I mean, I think it's good overall, right? Like, we don't have a lot of pessimism in us in general,
Mhm.
so when it comes to goals, we're pretty much always like, "Oh, yeah, we're gonna crush that, we're gonna crush that, like, no worries, no worries." But then when we don't, we're like, "Okay, on to the next one." Delusion, if you will?
Delusional. Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, I'm trying to think. I don't think either of my parents were super optimistic. It also makes me think of, like, what how I react to Jace, which is probably pretty similar, that everything's gonna be okay.
Yeah. Jace is Lauren's son.
Yes, my 6-year-old.
Will also said that adversity is a gift that shouldn't go to waste, which is so good. I actually did write that down when he said that because it's so I don't know, adversity is considered a bad thing always.
Well, it
And
reminds me of the journey of the warrior.
yeah.
Yeah. Because you always there was a part in it where Glennon Doyle talks about, like, well, we want our kids to be strong and resilient and do all these things, and it never through like, we never want it to be through any pain or adversity, but that is actually how you get there. So, yes, that's what that just reminded me of.
So good. So Glennon Doyle is my favorite author, and in the book Untamed, she talks about is it Untamed or is it a book earlier than Untamed?
I
No,
don't
I think it's
it's
in Love Warrior, her second book. She talks about the journey of the warrior, which she basically goes to this hot yoga class and she's like deeply, deeply, deeply depressed at the time and is like just trying to make it through every single day. She goes this yoga class, she doesn't know it's hot yoga and she walks in and she's like, "Oh my god." And the yoga teacher says like, "I want everyone to go around and set an intention for this class." And when it got to her, she said, "My intention is to stay on this mat in this class and not leave until the very end." And she did. And she didn't do any pose. Like she literally laid on the mat the whole class. And she said it was like an organic baptism. Like she was just sweating and crying. And when the class was over, the teacher went up to her and said, that, my dear, was the journey of the warrior. And the metaphor with life is like at times life is gonna be super uncomfortable, and it is gonna feel like a sweaty hot yoga class that's, like, you're suffocating in it and you're uncomfortable, and your job is to, like, stick it through and don't run out of the class. Like, make it through the discomfort 'cause you can, like, come out on the other side, and it's so good, and that is right? Like, willingness to be disheartened and adversity. It's you talked about this as we were prepping for the episode, like, not immediately fixing things.
yeah.
And it's funny because Clark and I will talk about this anytime we have like an argument. We'll say, do you want me to listen to you right now? Or do you want me to like come up with solutions? And so many times we're like, oh, we just want somebody to vent to. And that I think is like the ultimate lesson of this, right? Is like sometimes people just want someone to vent to.
Yes. Agreed. I'm reading Untamed right now. I can't wait to get through it.
Do you love it?
I do.
Favorite book of all time. So good. Okay. Last one.
Last
This one was also hard for me as well.
Yeah, this one's hard. Willingness to say sorry. And we talked about this a little bit, how, like, I used to overly apologize, and I think women, especially in the workplace, apologize a lot more than men, and so a lot of the times now I find myself swinging to the other side of, like, not willing to apologize. So I have this rule for myself where I don't apologize for something more than 3 times, just simply because I think then it takes away from the meaning of, like, the actual
Mhm.
apology.
Mhm.
But I think willingness to say sorry is so important, and you and I talked a little bit in the beginning of, like, it's hard. It's hard for us to apologize.
Mhm. I think number 1, I'm stubborn, is, really just a characteristic that I don't love about myself, and I tell my therapist this, and she says she's stubborn too, so that made me feel a little bit better because she seems very zen to me. Yeah, I definitely struggle with my stubbornness, and Clark is, like, the best at apologizing, and so he teaches me to be better, but I really like that Will talked about apologizing when you didn't necessarily do anything wrong as it relates to, like, a guest, just in hospitality in general, and I thought about our team and how we could do such a better job of, like, taking ownership of everybody and their mistakes rather than not just saying, like, "Oh, that was Lauren's fault," or "That was Megan's fault, so, like, I'm not gonna apologize for it." Like, "Oh, someone on our team must have done this and messed up."
Yes, I
And
really wanna implement that with our team. Just, like,
yeah.
if one of us messed up, then, like, we all did. And, like, just having that, like, actual team mentality. Something else that he said that I thought was really good was, like, it doesn't mean you're accepting blame, but you are creating, like, their perception of reality, and that could be a tool to actually have them, like, de-escalate the situation or have them put their guard down.
So good. I thought about, I used to have this Chrome extension. I can't remember what it was called, but it was for women to install, and it would underline any time in your Gmail where you use the term sorry, like if you said, "I'm sorry," if you said like if you used too many exclamation points, if you said like the word just, um like, as in explain like, I was just saying or I was just, and
Mhm.
it's so interesting, and the Chrome extension basically pointed out all of these things that, like, women typically say more than men that are just more I don't even know the term for it, but, like, not as assertive,
Yes.
and it was so enlightening to me because I said I'm sorry so much. Like, it was
Why did you stop using it?
yeah, I don't know why I did. I don't know oh, because I started using this email tool called Superhuman, and, like, instead of Gmail, and so I can't use it anymore, but it was so good, and I'll find out what the Chrome ex I wonder if it still exists now, but I don't know, it helped me understand, like, the phrases that I was using a little bit too much, and I wasn't coming across, like, very assertive in general,
Mhm,
like and I'm sorry is one of those things, right? And so trying to figure out, like, not overcorrecting,
mhm.
apologizing when, like, someone's experience is less than ideal, because even though you're not the person that even if you are, right? But in a case, if you're not the person that's responsible for making their, like, situation less than ideal, you can still, like, be sorry for somebody or be sorry on behalf of, like, your company or the organization that you're representing. And
Right.
that doesn't mean that you're over apologizing, right? Over apologizing to me means if there's an uncomfortable situation and you're being honest and you say like, "I'm sorry to bring this up." Like, "Hey, you don't have to be sorry to bring something up that's honest and, like, feels truthful to you and is needs to be said," right? You can be sorry if you've, like, screwed something up, if you've made a decision on behalf of your team that you wish you wouldn't have that impacted others, like, I don't know, recognizing when to and when not to say sorry because I tend this is very interesting. When I need to say sorry, I don't, and then when I don't need to say sorry, I say it 15 times. So I'm
Same.
really trying to find that line.
Yeah, same. That apologizing 3 times has been helpful for me, which also came from my therapist.
I love that. I think that's so good.
Yeah.
I'm gonna find this Chrome extension and I'll share it in the show notes. God, Will, gotta love him.
So glad we got to see him again.
Me too. I know, now I'm like, can he go to every single DARM possible?
I wonder
And
if
then
he
once you see him twice, I'm like, I think that we're, like, friends, and even though he could not, he has no
has no idea who we are.
singular idea who we are. But I don't know, there's something about an inspiring keynote that really keeps you going. Verma, do you remember at Disney, they had the guy that worked for Disney that did that
Yes.
keynote on, like, creativity, and that was so good.
Yeah, I really liked him. Riley and I were just talking about him the other day.
I freaking love a keynote speaker.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you were back on the show, Gertie. I missed you.
Thanks for having me.
It's always fun to I don't know, I think it's really good because Lauren manages her own team at the Outpost group, and so we bounce ideas off of each other and talk through like, "Hey, I made this mistake or this person on my team made a mistake," and it's always helpful to talk through like leadership things and tips and tricks that we've learned and then also, teach each other some things. So, it was a pleasure to have you back.
Well, thank you, Megan Myers. I've sure learned a lot from you.
I've sure learned a lot from you, Gertie. Well, everybody, thanks for tuning in. I can't wait to see what next week brings. We are still going to have episodes. Think I keep saying Thanksgiving. I wish it was Thanksgiving so we could start Christmas all over again. We're still going to have episodes Christmas week and New Year's week, and I did a couple of revenue management sessions at DARM. So I think that the next episode is going to be a little bit of a revenue management focus for any data nerds that want to geek out with me next week. And until then, see you soon.
Okay. Talk to you in 5 minutes.
Bye.